Hi, I'm Michelle Bollinger. I'm the Coordinator for Career Services here in the College of Education. And today we're going to be talking about discovering your personal brand and networking. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So what is personal branding? This really allows you to make a name for yourself in your field especially, as well as through the internet and offline tools. And so I think a lot of people, from my experience, thought branding was really, that personal branding was online, but it's really everything about you. So it's how you interact with people, it's the way you present yourself, whether or not you have business cards. Something that small that we're going to talk about here in a minute is personal branding. So why is it important? Well, it's important for various reasons, but really to promote yourself as a specialist in your area. Position yourself for your unique talent. So what can you bring an employer? What can you bring, a district or a company or something of that nature? And it's really building those relationships with other individuals. And that really goes for the same for networking, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But branding and networking really fall hand in hand. So those are the three biggest reasons of why personal branding is important. And so this is how you create your personal brand. You want to make sure that you're authentic. You want to be passionate about what it is that you're doing, and hopefully you are, since you're in this field. You need to assess yourself. So really, who are you? What do you want to do? My boss asked me a couple of months ago, it was interesting, we had a conversation, and she said, what do you want people to say about you in your career? And so that really resonated with me, and that has stuck with me. And so that's kind of what I tell my students as well is, what do you want people to say about you? And so you brand yourself, but finding your niche, knowing your audience. So who is it going to be? Is it going to be an employer? Is it going to be a colleague? Knowing your audience will really help you as well as tailoring your brand. You want to make sure that you're always persistent. So, maybe after we have this discussion today, you'll be, all for it, and then maybe it'll just die down a little bit. But you want to make sure that you're kind of persistent with it. And then being proactive, not reactive. And so when I mean that reactive, it's, if you go online and you search for yourself, you're giving yourself that digital footprint. And it's really kind of a way of branding yourself. So maybe Google yourself, see what comes up, and then help yourself build, I think, a positive brand. So for myself, I put Michelle Bollinger Career, Michelle Bollinger Missouri, or something like that. So, but for me, what I really want to focus on is my career, or human resources, something of that nature. And so, if you typed in Michelle Bollinger Career, I'm at least the first two that pull up. And so I think, maybe doing something like that will help as well. So being proactive, being authentic, and injecting your own personality. I think everybody has something to offer, so making sure that you're true to yourself, because you don't want to lose yourself when you're trying to brand yourself into something that you're not. So making sure that you are going to be yourself. Amazing and truthful about you. Everybody has something that is amazing. Focusing on your strengths. So what have you done that has been successful in the past? And what are you capable of? So what can you offer, this future employer? And using your life experiences to really set you aside. Nobody's had the same walk of life. You always never judge a book by their cover type of thing. So what kind of story can you tell me that is truthful about you, that will make me want to hire you if I'm an employer? So thinking about those types of things. So knowing your passions. I think this is something that people really need to look into, and I know this is a lot of information on the slide, but just discovering what it is you really want to do, and that may change over time, but as long as you continue to grow, as we're in education, we're all lifelong learners, and I am a firm believer in that, and so those may change a little bit, but I think just knowing what that end goal, what that outcome is going to be, excuse me, It should reflect who you are and who you want to be. Your personal brand should. So thinking about that and asking yourself these questions. So what do I value? What are my interests? What are my strengths? How can I make a difference? And what do I hope to accomplish? So, I mean, I have the PowerPoint slides. You know, if you wanted to copy those onto a Word document and just answer those questions, those simple questions, I think will give you more insight to who you are. Mm-hmm.
So what happens if, like in the value section, you have several things, but they switched priorities for you? Mm-hmm. How do you address that change, that shift?
And I think that, have they all stayed the same, but they've just shifted in their priorities? And I think that just goes along with maybe some of the experiences that you've had. And so just knowing that, like maybe you have a top 3, you know, values, and they move around from here to there. And I think that that's normal. Okay. I think that that is being truthful to yourself and acknowledging that maybe some of your priorities have changed, but answering that question, why? So why have they changed? So what different experiences can you pull in as you're branding yourself to explain why your values have changed in the sequence of what you had initially?
Okay.
And assessments are your friend. Very firm believer in this. One is called Via Character, and so it's viacharacter.org. This is a free assessment. Anybody can take it online, and it's really more of that value. So we're kind of talking about the value-based. Something that I love and that I have taken and that I try to get students to take is Strengths Finder. And if you're an MU student, you can do this through the MU Career Center. It's for $15. I love it. I remember whenever I first took Strengths Quest or Strengths Finder, and I got my top 5 strengths because that's what they give you. I was like, yes, number 1 is achiever, and I went down the list, and what it does also is it gives you a paragraph about what it means. Like, so achiever for me will mean something different if you have achiever in your top 5. And so I always try to tell my students that if they're going on interviews and they've taken the Strengths Quest, to read over what those paragraphs say about them. They should have already done that before, but it kind of gives you a little bit more insight to maybe who you are as a professional. But you can keep going deeper and deeper into Strengths Finder, learning more about it. The MU Career Center is great about that. But I think it's phenomenal, and I think for me, I think it's only strengthened them. So I know what I really go with my top 3, achiever, relator, and belief, are my top 3. And so I use that when I work with students every day. And I think it's even made them just be stronger, to be honest. So there's different ways you can use it, but definitely try to do one or the other. Yeah. So brand discovery assessment, so a little bit similar, some additional questions to ask. And one of your handouts, they have, it really gives you questions to ask yourself. So just a little bit in further detail. Who are you? What can you offer? Short-term and long-term goals. Those are going to be typical interview questions as well. So just knowing that information ahead of time when you're trying to develop this brand will be helpful to you as well. Positive attributes. So again, this question comes up, what do others say are your strengths? And so again, going back to that question that my supervisor asked me, what do you want people to say about you, really comes along with that assessment of yourself. And then that brand discovery worksheet, which is the handout that you have as well. Okay, so identifying where you really fit in. So what are your hobbies? What are your strengths? What are your career goals and your experiences? And so, everybody's probably chosen a field at this point, but what else can you bring? Or if it's nothing outside of that field that you really want to focus on, what do you want to try to be an expert about within your major, within your field? So really looking at the extras is what I would kind of call them. Knowing your audience, this is something very big to consider. Who are you trying to get this message across to? And so if it's going to be a colleague, the way you present yourself may be a little bit different than for somebody that you want to be a future employer. So knowing that audience, where are they? Are they online? If they're online, you want to make sure that you're online as well. So if if networking with, administrators or with company, CEOs or something like that, if they're online, if they're on Twitter, if they're on LinkedIn, you want to get on there too. You want to follow them. You want to do all of that, so that you have that presence that they have as well. So doing their research, so identifying the blogs, the communities, the websites where you can connect with those individuals, and I put 3 up here. I think LinkedIn is something that quite a few people now have heard of. If you're on it, use it. I think it's, sometimes LinkedIn can get a little difficult. It can be a little intimidating at first. And so maybe just, stopping by my office so we can go over it. The MU Career Center can certainly help you with that as well. And they have tutorials on LinkedIn as well. But I think, figuring out where you fit and an online presence. The other 2 that actually students have given me that I had not heard about before until I actually gave this presentation at another venue is researchgate.net. And so, it's essentially networking online for researchers, and so that's going to be more of like the sciences and things of that nature. But the other one that I think resonated with the majority of the people that were in the room when I gave this last presentation was the academia.edu. And so, you can follow people that are in your field, you can look at papers, you can post your own papers. So it's really this big professional networking website for anybody in academia. So definitely I would say check out those 3 websites, see kind of where you fit in, and then make yourself available to others. So being persistent, so that was one of those bullets, is being persistent. So setting those goals, and what can you do every day to try to meet those goals for your personal branding? You always want to make a positive impression. I have students that ask me, I had a really negative experience that made me want to go this route or do something more, but you never want to talk about it like it's a negative experience. You always want to try to turn it into that positive. And some people are really good about doing that, and others are like, how do I say this? And so that's something that we can actually talk about. To try to make that positive. Make yourself memorable, but in a good way. You don't want anybody to have maybe like a negative connotation about you when they think about it, about maybe that meeting or that presence that they had with you, and learn from your mistakes, because I'm kind of a firm believer in the fact that, in order to learn, you have to fail, and, you have to fall sometimes. And so as long as you learn from those mistakes, I think that's the greatest thing that can come out of a failure. So just keep on keeping on, I think. Being proactive, so creating the opportunities, and be deliberate about it. So, if I go online and I have an online presence, I'm going to be deliberate about it. So if I want someone to find me about career services, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And incorporate your interests with my career. And so something that's not directly aligned with my career is, recruitment, a recruitment aspect. And so what can I do to kind of pull that into the line of career services? If I want to focus on working with minority students was another interest of mine, how can I make that an interest within my career? And diversity, just the aspect of it all. And so I think, some people may have that perfect job where they get to do everything of their interest. And I think it's because they've made it that way. Honestly, and I think that, you hear people that say, I love my job, I love what I do. I think it's because they are able to bring in who they are, what their interests are, and they're able to incorporate it into their job in some way or another. So if you discovered your brand, now what do you do with it? You want to maintain it and monitor it online especially. So, and I say monitor it online. I don't think that this has happened, I think, to, many people, but maybe, I'm going to use a celebrity for an example. You have somebody wants to have a good brand, but then somebody else is saying something negative about them. So how do you monitor that? So I think just kind of Googling yourself every once in a while, searching yourself, and just hoping that nothing is negative out there, that you've never put anything negative out there, but what has somebody else possibly said negatively, and then addressing it online. I'm going to use a YouTube video, for example. So maybe you've posted something on YouTube about your career, your interests, as you're trying to develop your brand, and then maybe somebody makes a negative comment. So how can you monitor that? Can you turn those comments off? Can you address it, on YouTube as well? Like they have the conversations that can go back and forth. So I think just kind of looking at different ways that you can, make sure that everything that's out there, or the majority of what's out there, is positive. If an employer were to search for you, would they find positive? Making sure that you are searchable, and that is really key. And so using those keywords, like I said, Michelle Bollinger, career. So I did a search for myself this morning to see what came. I knew I was number 1 on it, but to see how many more I had down. And so there were a couple in between, but at least the first 10 I had the majority. And then incorporating your name into your blog as well. So any way that somebody can search to find out about you is what you really want. And so I think that goes into play too with some people that write blogs and are very opinionated. Maybe they should, I don't want to say, calm down on on their opinions, but maybe not be negative in that opinion. Or if you're going to do so, I had somebody say, well, I do so, but I do it under a completely different name. So there's no trace back to me. And I think that I'm not going to tell somebody not that they can't do that. But I have had some people say that that's what they do on a completely different basis. So completely up to the individual. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but again, to each their own. So really just maintaining your brand after you get it. We're going to go right into networking. I think it follows really well with branding. So you have this brand, you're trying to maintain it, and now what you're going to do is you're going to use that brand to network. At the same time that you're networking, I think that you should have had a pretty good foundation of what your brand is, but it might shift a little bit, kind of how what you were saying is, my values are changing, they're shifting a little bit, and so that very well may happen as you begin to network. I think networking is something that's very fun to do, and it's really just establishing a strong relationship between another person, between a group of individuals, and it could be social, but what we're focusing on right now is that professional aspect of it. And having the conversations with people that you want to have conversations with, I think, is really key. And so I'm going to use a couple of examples, I think, as we kind of go on about different conferences. And so as graduate students, I would really encourage you, if you can, to go to conferences. And this is where you're going to wind up getting the most out of that networking experience. And it can be intimidating sometimes, so if you have questions as we go along, just let me know. So the basics, when you network, your name tag always goes on the right side. And the reason for this is because when you extend your hand to shake, they're going to be able to look right down. I've had some people say, well, I've heard that if it's on the left, then that's where the eye always goes. But from all of the research that I've done and the different presentations that I've given, it's, for me, always on that right side. Your purses and your briefcases will go on the left side. That is so your hand is free. You don't want to have to wait for somebody to extend their hand to you to shake before you can shift everything. So make sure your right hand's always free. You always want to give a firm handshake. Make sure you look that individual in their eye and smile when you give that handshake. And then, yes, so I did that already. So smile directly in the eye. Don't look at the name tag when you meet them. And so that's very difficult, and I find myself sometimes wanting to be like, hi, and I'm going to look at your name tag now. So try to, when they tell you their name, say it back to them, not their full name. Just say, hi Karen, it's nice to meet you after. So you have their name in your head again. And so as you're networking, you're usually in groups of some sort, or even if you're in one-on-one conversation, there'll be a little bit of maybe downtime, we're not staring in each other's eyes, or you can glance at their name tag. So just keep that in mind. Starting a conversation and introducing yourself. This can be difficult at networking events. I've been there, I've done that. I was at a conference in the fall, and I was in my hotel room, and I had to give myself a pep talk. I'm like, you can do this, you got it, you're going to meet these people, it's going to be great relationships. And I had to really do that, because even though I enjoy it, I think it's intimidating. And it certainly can be. Now, once I got on the floor and I was in my, my mode and I was going, it was fine, but so give yourself a pep talk if that's what you need. But preparing your abstract of how you're going to introduce yourself. So hitting those high points. So again, what do you want people to say about you? What do you want them to know about you? Make sure it's relevant and interesting. If you wonder if something's relevant or interesting, before you go to a conference, talk to a peer, talk to somebody else about, what would you say about me? And that's something interesting too that you can do is, what would you say about me? What would you want to know about me? And kind of talking to somebody else before you go into the real deal. Identifying the commonality. So hopefully something will come up in the conversation. I mean, if you guys are at the same conference, there's already that commonality, so trying to maybe find something a little bit deeper to help you connect. And matching your introduction, so is it business? Are you at a business function? What do you do? And your social, and how are you connected? That's something, depending on the type of function that it is. Follow the golden rule, treat others the way you would want to be treated. And we're going to get a little bit more into this, and something that I'm very big on at networking events is being inclusive. And so we're going to talk about that, I think, in the next slide, just a little bit more. So you want to offer a genuine compliment when you're talking to somebody. So let's say I go to a conference, I want to meet the president of this organization. I'm going to make sure that I go meet this individual. I want to offer a genuine compliment. So, if I really enjoy the presentation, I'm going to let them know that. I wouldn't let them know that I didn't enjoy their their presentation, but you want to be genuine in it, because if you're not, they're going to know that. And so if you really want to know more about their research, then ask about it. So talk about the event. So there are some starting questions that you can kind of use, and be knowledgeable about the current events, in sports, what's going on. If maybe you're not like a sports guru, maybe just look it up to kind of, briefly read the headlines, see what interests you, but then read the article. Read what's actually happening. So don't just say, oh, how about those Saints or whatever it may be, because you may have no idea what you're talking about, and they want to go a little bit deeper into that conversation. So it's important to not only read the headlines, but what's under those headlines. Always avoid sensitive topics, religion, politics. Make sure you always avoid those, especially at professional conferences. And talk about your interests and hobbies, your spare time. If they travel, maybe, this international conference, you can talk about the traveling. Of course, they've done traveling lately. Where have you been before? I would say to keep family out of it. Although it's not necessarily a sensitive topic, it's still one of the topics that you don't want to cross over when you first meet somebody on a professional level. So network while eating. This is fun. I do this twice a month with administrators from the St. Louis and the Kansas City school districts here in Missouri. I love this event, but food is always secondary when you're at an event function. You want to make sure you keep those conversations professional. You want to make sure you keep them going and the other person engaged. And so, I put up here, eat like you would at your mother's table. I don't know if I'd put that up there for my son sometimes, but eat like you would maybe if you're on a first date. What would you do? What would you have done? Don't chew with your mouth don't talk with food in your mouth and chew with your mouth closed. I know that's, somebody's formed a bad habit, and you do that. Ask your friends if you do that, because they'll probably tell you if they haven't already. Select foods that are easy to eat. Avoid anything sticky that you have to use with your hands. And if standing, there'll be some networking events where there'll be like the cocktail tables. Make sure that you don't try to hold a cup and a plate. And then when you try to shake somebody's hand, put the cup with the plate and then it falls and it can just be a big mess. So have one or the other. My advice is to always have some water with you or a cup of a beverage. I would stray away from soda, but water is usually your best bet there. Holding your cup in your left hand, again, keeping that right hand free is always key. So having the conversations that you want to have. The other thing that I did when I was at my conference is that when I was giving myself my pep talk, I was like, okay, I want to hit these points. And so before I went down to, because we had an actual networking event, so it was actually really cool. But, I thought about the topics that I wanted to touch on. And so, it wasn't just about me at that point, because it was, but it was about my students, because I was really trying to market my, the education program here at Mizzou, the University of Missouri, to international, school districts, national school districts, and so I had to really hit my highlights. And so I wrote those down, went over those a little bit, and prepared those 2 to 3 talking points. But I also had questions about what I wanted to learn. So what is it that I can bring back from school districts that I can tell my students? So in turn, then if they wanted to go out to Colorado, is where who was hosting the event, what are they looking for? If I have students that want to go out there, what are administrators looking for at different areas? It usually matched up the majority of the part, but just wanting to know those types of things. Doing the research, definitely, especially if there's somebody there that you want to meet. If there's a president of an organization that's given a presentation and you really want to meet that individual, look them up. Because if you can say something, again, genuine, but flattering to that individual that you've done that research, it is very flattering. And so I wouldn't go overboard by any means, but just showing them that you've done your research as well, I think, really means a lot. So seeking out the people that you want to talk to. Don't be shy, so give yourself that pep talk if you need. Be curious and courteous, so ask questions, but above all, really be a good listener. Don't try to take over that conversation. So how do you leave a conversation? This can get, if you're not at a networking type of, like a speed networking type of event, you don't have somebody saying, okay, switch, or, sounding a buzzer. And so sometimes it can get a little awkward, and I think it's just normal. I know if everybody's ever had that conversation, like, how do I get out of this? But you don't want to spend more than 8 to 10 minutes. Now, if you're at a speed networking type of event, it's going to be anywhere from like 2 to 3, sometimes 5 minutes. Then they'll sound that buzzer. But usually 8 to 10 minutes with one, person, just because you want to be able to meet as many people as you possibly can. Now, if you're in a group, that may vary a little bit, but you want to smile. I've said that before. You want to make the eye contact. And the biggest thing is leaving the conversation. I really feel like that's one of the biggest things, is because the easiest way to do it is by introducing somebody else. And so that's where that part of inclusiveness that I was talking about earlier comes in. If you see somebody kind of on the sides and they're waiting to come into a conversation, allow a space between you and the person next to you. Bring them in. And this is if you know them. Usually, and if you don't know them, to say, hi, would you like to, introduce yourself to them and then bring them into the conversation. And that would be maybe a great transition for you to head out as well. These are some helpful phrases to kind of help you get out. I don't want to waste any more of your time, so it's not really on you, it's on that other person. And remember, it's a networking event. Don't feel the need to justify why you're leaving. You're there to meet people. And the majority of people should know that. Even if they do, sometimes it's hard to get some people to stop talking if they get really excited. So how do you do that in a nice and polite way, but still to where you can meet the people that you want to? Happy medium. So entering the group conversation, you want to make sure you observe it first. And there should be, like I said earlier, there should be a little bit of a gap. So kind of make your way around to that gap. I'm very big on this. If I'm in a group conversation, I want to try to make sure that person knows that I see them. So I'm going to look at them several times so the people around me can tell that I'm also looking away because I want to bring somebody in. I may not know that person, but I wouldn't want to be the person on the outside just being like, okay, can I come in yet? Can I join? You know what I mean? Just standing all by myself. So keep that in mind. You wait until join the conversation until you are acknowledged. If you are the individual coming into that conversation, again, don't dominate. Helping others join is really what I was talking about. I think that this is really the biggest key, because if somebody is on the outside and you're that person to make that eye contact, you're that person to bring them in, they're going to remember that. Again, it's treating others how you'd want to be treated. So keeping that in mind as well. So following up, You want to make sure you jot down a few notes when you go. So like for me, when I went back up to my hotel room, I had business cards, and I just jotted down a few things on the back or on like just a post-it note about that person, stuck it to their business card, so I knew to follow up with them. And I did that. So the date that I met them, where I met them, of course I knew where I met them, but what were some of those talking points that we kind of talked about, so I could follow up and say, hey, it was great meeting you at the conference. I really enjoyed our conversation on this, this, and this. For me to be able to say that after meeting so many people, I think it is flattering to that other person. And so I had some individuals that emailed me as well, and we still had that connection. We still have that professional relationship. And so is it going to happen 100% of the time? It's not. You may put something out there and somebody may not give it back, and that's okay. It's really that you put yourself out there. And it's really, so if I want to go to a conference next year, I'm like, hey, so-and-so, we met last year, I'm coming out there again. And it's just a sense of, like a load's almost taken off your shoulder. Because last year was my first year to go to our national conference, so it was a really big deal. So it's very different now. Maintaining that contact, again, I put those 3 websites up there again. So we're all on LinkedIn. We have a group on LinkedIn. They're not on ResearchGate or academia.edu. I don't use those as much. But if you're going to those types of conferences where those avenues would be well suited, then you definitely want to make sure that you use those as well. Okay, so that is branding and networking in a nutshell. If you have questions, if you're an online or distance student, please feel free to call me or email me. My information is right here. And if you are a student here at the Mizzou campus, you can ask me questions now or feel free to come by my office. Thank you.